Vintage stockings. So stockings have been around for a very long time, since the 1800s, but stockings have kind of evolved over time. They've been made out of different materials, different styles, and that's what this video is about. But first, I've got to point out that a significant portion of you are not subscribed, so don't forget to do that if you want to support the channel. By the way, I have a new channel called Shining Times, which is quite a bit different from this channel and is mainly about outdoorsy things like gardening, hiking, traveling, maybe a few recipes here and there. If you're interested in that sort of thing, subscribe. It's a very new channel and I appreciate the support. The stockings I'm mainly going to be talking about in this video are from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, because those were like the primary times for vintage stockings. At least is how we think of them today. So stockings mainly started out as silk. In the late 20s and throughout the 30s, silk stockings were pretty much the main stockings you would be wearing. They were very shiny, very soft, obviously they're pure silk, and they were also extremely delicate because, as you can imagine, that thin of silk fabric, extremely delicate. As soon as you snag it, it's done for. But those were pretty much the main options for back then. It was only when nylon was invented later on that nylon kind of took over the stocking industry. And as soon as people discovered that nylon was quite a bit, not only more durable, but also more affordable than silk stockings, they pretty much took over the whole industry. And throughout the 40s and 50s and, you know, beyond that, nylon was the go-to fabric. It was so popular because rayon was also another popular fabric for stockings, but nylon was so much the main choice that people didn't even refer to them as stockings, but instead nylons. Probably the most substantial part of all of the history of stockings was during World War II, because during World War II, there was a very significant shortage of nylon and rayon and materials like that. So the army would often put up these kind of donation boxes where women could donate their old stockings, nylon stockings that they didn't need anymore, because those would eventually be reprocessed into materials that were needed for the war. The problem with that is that because there was such a shortage of nylon and other materials made for stockings, there were no more stockings that women could buy in the stores, and that made women very upset because stockings were a very important daytime thing, a very important thing to wear for women back then, for the daytime, for the evening. They were pretty much kind of like underclothes. If you weren't wearing them, you were at least partially naked. So what women started doing, since there weren't really any stockings to buy at that point, they would actually paint their legs to make it look like they were wearing stockings. Often they would use gravy, which was, you know, pretty much the color of stockings, kind of a slightly darker shade from the skin. And they would just kind of slather their legs in gravy to tint their legs that color. Or another option was that they would often draw a line down the backs of their legs, and the line, which was the seam of the stockings, was kind of the most important characteristic, because all stockings back then had seams because that's just how they were made on the machines they were made on. And every once in a while, stores would occasionally get a packet or two of stockings, and women would literally raid the stores, fight like Black Friday style, crawling over each other to try and get to these stockings because they were so hard to come by at that point. Fortunately, after the war, things started going back to normal, but for about a year directly after the war, there was still quite a shortage on stockings, and the same problem continued happening where basically the stocking companies underestimated how much women really wanted these stockings. So again, women just kept swarming these stores trying to get these products. And only the years following, it was completely regularized again, and women returned quite happily to wearing their stockings. And in terms of style of stockings, there were quite a few different options. So first of all, there were many different colors, so they could easily match many different skin tones, but it wasn't always about matching the skin tone either. A lot of stockings were bright white, pitch black, very sheer, kind of a neutral color. So you know, lots of room for picking different shades. A lot of women enjoyed wearing darker stockings, even black stockings, because black is very slim in color. It can make your legs look much thinner. But for the daytime, it was very common for women to just wear sheer, neutral stockings to kind of just blend in with their natural legs. And the seam would often be a slightly different color from the rest of the stockings. For the daytime, it would usually be a nude color, again, to kind of blend in with the rest of the leg, although it was not uncommon for there to be a black seam to stand out a bit more. And for the evening, usually the entire stocking would be darker for evening wear. I'm going to show you some very authentic reproduction stockings, which I have. I quite like them. This is from the brand What Katie Did. This product will be in a link in the description of this video if you're interested, but I quite like this particular brand because they do a really good job of creating really authentic vintage lingerie specifically. So I'll show you these stockings. Alright, so here is a very long stocking. So this would be called a fully fashioned stocking, although, disclaimer, this is technically not a true fully fashioned stocking. Fully fashioned means it's made on a very old machine that it knits the nylon in a very specific way, and it's 100% nylon. Today, you know, obviously a lot of tights and stockings and pantyhose are spandex. They're not made on those old machines, modern sort of things, but this is pretty close to what you can get. Now, the reason why this is not 100% vintage authentic is because the seam, you could see the seam here, is technically not a real seam. This one is actually just a fake seam, but they do have also stockings with the real seam made on those real authentic machines, of which there's only very few left in the world. I want to see there's like 3 left in the world. So definitely a very special item, but despite this not being a real seam, it's still authentic to the look. So the first thing is, this is a huge stocking, or at least it looks like a huge stocking. So the big difference here between vintage stockings and modern pantyhose and tights, the vintage ones had to be made to the shape of your leg because, again, they didn't really stretch. They had some natural stretch just from how they were woven, the nylon, but not like spandex. They didn't stretch nearly as much as, you know, pantyhose today. So they had to be made like this, very long to the shape of your leg. So this goes midway up your thigh, and this is the, you know, the thigh band to which you would attach your garters for your garter belt to hold up the stockings. And then, again, the seam down the middle. This is a completely nude color. I think it's called latte on their website, but let me bring attention to the heel. So the heel here, you can see it has the reinforced toe, the bottom of the foot, and then this heel part. It's kind of hard to see, but this reinforced heel comes to a pretty sharp point, and there were quite a few different reinforced heel styles because, and this is only one that I have, but the reinforced heel would, you know, when a woman would be wearing high heels or any type of shoe, the reinforced heel was meant to obviously prevent the shoe from rubbing against the back of the stocking and ruining it because it was thicker. But also, it was kind of a nice little style that women could change between. So that pointy one that I showed you is called the French heel, which was very, you know, high-class vogue. It became more popular in the 1950s especially. But before that, in the 1940s, there was the Cuban heel, also known as the Spanish heel, which was pretty similar, except instead of coming to a point at the end of the heel, it would be more of a square top. And then there were a few other variations. There was the Manhattan heel, which was kind of, you know, more of a geometrical shape with an extra line bordering it. And then also in the 1950s, there were some additional little decorations that would sometimes be sewn into the kind of body of the stocking. And the popularity of stockings pretty much continued for a long time throughout the 50s and early 60s until kind of in the mid to late 60s, regular kind of full at least half body tights would become popular. So instead of stockings which would require, you know, a garter belt to hold it halfway up your thigh, in the 60s up to your hips would be more popular. Also, they came out with some very, very bright colors. You know, women would often wear yellow tights, red tights, green tights, lots of these crazy colors. White was a popular option as well. And coming out of the 60s into the 70s, pantyhose, tights, and stockings in general started to kind of decline in popularity. They still remained into the 80s, and even arguably into the early 90s, especially for business or more formal occasions. And after that, there was a pretty significant decline in the popularity of stockings, and today, really, you don't often see people wearing them anymore unless it's a very special occasion. There are companies who still reproduce these vintage products, which I think is really cool, to be able to kind of take something back from the past and wear it yourself. But that's pretty much all I have to say about stockings for this video. I know this is a bit different from my usual content, but hopefully you enjoyed it. If you have any opinions about this subject, you can always leave those down in the comment section below. If you liked the video, leave a like, maybe subscribe, and I make videos throughout the week, so stick around for those.